Ya, faltaba el sonido.
Ah, ok.
¿No apareces en vivo? No me digas
Parece que
eso.
solamente teatro uno en vivo.
No, no te preocupes.
Ya.
Ya vamos a empezar.
Yo le dije a él que ya, yo activo el micrófono en un momentito y le digo que
Ya,
ponga
eso ya
sus
está
cosas.
transmitiendo.
Sí.
Sí, ya lo voy a revisar.
Ok, en vivo. Room 4, Theater 1.
¿Tú eres room
No aparece.
2?
Room 2. Ah, sí, mira acá.
Room 2. Sí, ya estás.
Listo, excelente. Vamos a ver si hay gente conectadita. Solo que aquí hay 3 personas conectadas. Yo le dije que esperáramos un momentico. Voy a esperar 2 minuticos. Voy a ir saludando a los del chat. No. Ay, no, allá no. Yo me equivoco mucho escribiendo acá. Como yo todo lo tengo es en WhatsApp web. Si ves, volví y me puso allá. Entonces se puede corregir. Uno puede corregir una. Mírame, me puso good morning allá. Ay, uno no puede corregir, ¿cierto que no? Como yo todo lo tengo es en.
Ay, eso está quedando en vivo. Ese micrófono.
Hello. Should we begin in a few minutes or should I just get started?
Camilo, I think we can start. There are some people already connected. Good morning, everyone. So, and welcome to this session. Welcome to this session of National ELT Medellin 2025. We're very glad to have you here as we continue sharing ideas and experiences that enrich our teaching practice. It is my pleasure to introduce Camilo Sanchez. Camilo is the co-founder of COO of Ginso Labs, where he leads the development of AI-powered English tutors used by top binational centers and education institutions across Latin America and the Caribbean. Our Harvard-educated physicist fluent in Spanish and English. Camilo brings a decade of experience in adaptive assessment and AI-driven learning tools for K-12 systems in the US and Canada. At Ginso Labs, he focuses on building teacher-guided AI solutions that make English learning more personalized, accessible, and measurable. His work lies at the intersection of language education, artificial intelligence, and education equity, driven by the belief that language should never be a barrier to opportunity. Camilo's background also includes research in atomic physics and precision measurement, which informs his approach to building rigorous, scalable technologies for learners worldwide. It is today, so he will be leading a session on prompting with purpose, AI strategies you can start using in class tomorrow. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Camilo. Camilo?
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Today, I'll be honest, I wasn't sure which language to do this presentation in, so I decided to do it in both Spanish and English. The slides will be in Spanish, but if it's okay with you, we can speak perhaps a little bit of both while we're talking. As we mentioned, today's talk is very exciting for me because it's about how we can provide advanced techniques for English teachers that they can use directly in their day-to-day life. Now, as it was mentioned, my name is Camilo Sanchez. I'm the COO of Ginso Labs. And in this capacity, one of the most important tasks I have is ensuring that our students have very good experiences with AI, and more importantly, in making sure we have fine control over that artificial intelligence. For those of you who don't know, Ginso is an American company based out of New York and now Sao Paulo. Here we're in our Sao Paulo office that provides English language institutions like government schools and universities with immersive AIs for their students and their teachers. We're the only AI company in the world with a proprietary model for language learning for Spanish speakers learning English. And from a personal side, I have a deep passion for language learning because when I was very young, my second language was Spanish. So my family was from Colombia. I grew up in the United States, but when I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, I really struggled learning Spanish until my mother, she's from Santander, she sat me down and said, Camilo, si no me hablas en español, no te voy a dar más de comer. And she meant it. So she was very serious, and I kept talking to her in English, and she kept ignoring me until eventually, thankfully, I had my brothers and my grandparents around to help me practice Spanish and get that immersion needed to learn a language. And you guys all know this. You guys all know that as English teachers, you need to have immersion for your students to learn. And so many years later, when I was at Harvard and I met our CEO and co-founder, Jay Ligapalan, we connected over this love of language learning. He was studying artificial intelligence. I was studying physics, but we came together to learn language. In his case, it was also very funny. He grows up speaking English and in Hindi. However, in order to marry his now wife, he had to learn Korean because his mother-in-law told him that if he didn't learn Korean, she's from South Korea, he couldn't marry her. And so together we realized that this AI presents a completely revolutionary approach to English language learning. And today we're going to share with you some techniques that we use to make sure our AIs have fine control over the process of student experience, and away we go. If at any point anyone has any questions, please feel free to let me know. I know we have La Coordinadora, so if anyone would like to let her know to ask me a question, that would be perfectly fine. And I'm happy to keep it interactive. So today we're going to do a few different things. In the first part, we're going to talk about what is prompting in the context of teaching English. Then we're going to talk about what is it exactly? Like, how do you do prompting? What are its structures? And then we're going to look into some examples of prompting and some different ways we can get more value out of it. Particularly, we're going to look at few-shot prompting. We're going to look at how you can use tipping and penalties and reward structures to increase your control over AI. And then at the last maybe 10 minutes, we're going to look into some very advanced prompting techniques that you can use in your day-to-day. If we have time, we will do a live demo, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions. Okay, that being said, let me start with what I want you to accomplish today. So by the end of this chat, I want you all to be able to do two things. One, I want you to know what prompting is and why it's relevant for your classrooms. And two, I want you to be able to use at least one new technique to prompt your AI to have better control. So if at the end of this chat, you guys know what prompting is and can say, this is why it's relevant to me, and you know at least one prompting technique, then I think we've been productive. If not, then please let me know and I will do my best to remedy that as soon as possible. Okay. So typically, I don't know if the audience has the ability to share their audio, but typically I like to start off by asking folks, why do you think prompting matters for teachers? ¿Por qué le importa el prompting para los docentes? No sé si alguien quisiera compartir o si la coordinadora puede presentar el audio, ahí podemos escuchar unas respuestas de la audiencia.
Camilo, it is not possible, but they can write their answers on the chat and on YouTube, and then I can share the information with you.
Perfect. Yes. If you guys want to take maybe a minute and write out some answers, we'll see if we can get some audience input. If not, we'll keep on going. And next time we get to these question slides, we'll just roll through them a little bit. But we'll give folks a minute or two to see if they have any ideas. If not, we'll continue. Okay. All right. I'm looking in the chat to see if we have any engagement yet, and I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Okay. All right, let's just keep on going for the sake of time. I know we have a tight hour and I don't want to spend too much time on any particular question. So I'll give you guys some basic answers we usually hear. So the three most common answers we hear about why prompting matters for teachers are: one, because it's how we get AI to do things; two, because if we don't know how to prompt, how can we teach our students? And three is, I don't know why prompting matters. And so based on those three responses, I want to delve into some of the common points about prompting and why I think you guys should all care about it. The first point is these statistics about how AI is currently being used and how it's expected to be used by students. 1 year ago in 2024, there was a global survey done on students' use of AI, their expectations for AI in education, and what's being done about it. And here I want to share some key results. The first key result is that students are expecting their faculty and educators to be ready for AI. That's to say, they expect their universities, their institutions of higher learning to increase the use of AI in teaching. That's a bulk majority. And then even a greater percentage, over 73%, think that universities should train their faculty on the effective use of AI. That is to say, this matters because students are going to start demanding this of you. And in order to make sure AI is productive in your classrooms, you need to be able to meet that demand. Additionally, we can look at how students are already using AI in their classrooms. If we look at these statistics, we can see that 86% of students 1 year ago were already reporting to use AI in their studies. And if we break that by frequency, we can see that nearly half of these students were doing it weekly or daily, which means that if a year ago there was this tremendous penetration of AI in the education space, it's very likely that right now these numbers are much higher. Now, usually when we're in person, I would ask everyone to raise their hand if they or their students have used AI, but I think it's safe to say most of you would have your hand raised right now. And going forward, one thing to keep in mind is that these numbers are unlikely to go down. It's more likely that students will continue to use AI more and more as it becomes more readily available and more integrated with their curricula. So students are using AI, they expect their teachers to use AI, and very fascinatingly, if we look at the survey of teachers by Forbes into how many teachers are integrating AI into their global practices across the world, we're seeing that a year ago, 60% were using it daily in their teaching practice. That was a year ago. Today, I expect this number to be much higher. So in short, we can say that the reason prompting matters for our educators, especially in the English level, is because it's already present in our classroom. It's going to be integrated more and more in your classroom, but its effectiveness depends on how you as teachers use it. So if you have better prompts, you can get more precise answers to your queries. You can get things more ready for your students and give them more interactive experience, and you can spend less time on things that are easily automatizable. So today we're going to go into the weeds of this technical problem and see how we can get you from writing weak prompts, like, for example, ayúdame a enseñar un vocabulario, a un prompt un poco más profundo, uno que le da un rol a la inteligencia artificial, empieza a dar contexto, cosas como actúe como un profesor de inglés y crea una actividad para emparejar vocabulario para un estudiante de B1 usando 6 palabras relacionadas con la comida y las comidas fuera del aula. So the goal is to go from basic to advanced and learn what makes advanced better. And then here we'll show you some techniques. Now, with that being said, we need to learn what is prompting. And now again, usually I'd give folks a minute or two to ask questions. However, we'll just continue going. I'll give you some common answers we've heard about what prompting is. And if anyone has anything they'd like to add, please feel free to add it in the chat, and then our coordinator here will let us know. So usually when it comes to prompting, the 3 most common responses we hear from teachers is 1, prompting is what I tell AI to do. It is the set of instructions. The second one I hear is prompting is the conversation I have with my bot. It's sort of a mix between what I told it to do and then my corrections to it. And then perhaps the third most common answer I hear when it comes to prompting is just the orders I give an AI. And all of these contain a partial port of the truth. However, one thing that I always like to emphasize when it comes to this point is that prompting, if you look at the part of speech, prompting is a verb. It's an action word. So prompting, I like to think of it not as an object, something you put into AI, but a process. It's the process whereby you can get your AI to do what you want, and there's a technical way of getting this done, which we're about to go into. So we can think that prompting is more like an art of designing prompts that guide models to generate what you want. It's to say it's not necessarily just about the input. It's about how you create the input and about how you can intuit what sort of inputs will get what type of outputs. Additionally, prompts are the instructions that you're going to give the AI to get the results that are most relevant to your desired context. And what I want you to walk away from here is that prompting is going to require trial and error, and it needs to be done carefully if you want a stable prompt that can be reused. So to get into why prompting works this way, I oftentimes like to give teachers the context of how prompts are used by AIs at the highest level. Now, this is going to be a bit of a gross oversimplification, but it'll give you an idea. The first point I like to make about how AI uses prompts is that AI doesn't understand language like you or I do. For us, when we say something, we know what it means and we can communicate what people's intentions are without truly needing it spelled out for us. So for example, we can do things like tell jokes or do sarcasm. And AI is getting better at that, but it doesn't really understand it the way we do. Really, what AI does is it has sort of like what I like to call like a spider web of probability. You can imagine that every input, every set of words or tokens in AI are linked together by threads that are statistical relationships. And prompts give you sort of a starting node whereby the AI can branch out through the statistical relationships and deliver an output. That's to say that one way to think of AI models is that it's much more similar to autocorrect than it is to a person. So it's going to try to intuit what you want based off of the content, and then it's going to try to follow statistical pathways to get to an output that's strongly associated with the input you give it. And what this means is that if you are thinking that AI is going to understand what you mean, it might or it might not, but really it's going to depend on how strongly associated what you're saying is with the desired output. And more specifically, the way AI does this is when you give it the prompt, it's going to take it and it's going to divide it into chunks. So it's going to take maybe your sentence and tokenize it. That's what the process is called. And each one of these tokens is going to get fed into, let's say, the spider web to predict what the next token should be. That's to say that when the AI is analyzing the prompt, it's really important to give it the critical information so that when it does this process of, let's say, going down the statistical web, it's going to know where to start correctly. And some very basic things you can do here are giving it like a role in understanding that, hey, you're an English teacher, or you want to do things in this style and do things for this audience. Those things now start to bundle the right statistical frameworks together to get the output that might be better. And additionally, we have to remember that these things are based on pattern recognition in some way, which is to say that when the AI's output is given or is associated with an input, it can be modern, it can be changed based on patterns it sees. So later on, we're going to see how this pattern aspect of AI, how it can see patterns and try to replicate them, comes back to give us a lot of power later on. And so with this framework, the question is, how should we do AI prompting? Knowing that this is a statistical process with strings attached to the output that we're going to follow, what does this make of us? And at the highest level, what I would say is it means that we need to do a little bit of trial and error to figure out what sort of starting point and what sort of inputs do we need to get the statistical association most likely to give us the output we're looking for. And so here's a 5-part process that I have come to rely on when it comes to prompting. The 5 parts are as follows. First, it's absolutely critical that you define your output. You need to have a clear vision in writing of what your objective is. If you don't know what your objective is going to be, it'll be very hard to iterate back on it, and it's going to be much harder to guide the AI to what you want. So, for example, perhaps I want to write a script or a prompt that generates a set of questions for a test. That's all fine and well. I need to make sure I understand what that looks like, and I have some examples ready. So I could say, for example, my objective is to do a test for students at this level. Here's an example. Okay. The second part, once you have your objective realized and in writing, is doing your best attempt to write this initial prompt. In this initial prompt, you're going to include your objective in your example, and you're going to give the AI as much context as you can that's relevant to the task. Perhaps you're going to tell it things about your students. Maybe you'll tell it things about your teaching methodology and the textbooks you're using. But whatever it is that you include, you need to make sure that it's related to what you want it to do and that you think it's likely to help your students or your output be realized. And now comes what I call the 3-4-5 cycle, which is where you have to test your prompt in a new environment, evaluate its outputs, and then refine your prompt. Later on, we'll get into what we mean by a new environment, but 2 things are really critical here. One is that your prompt needs to be tested and validated against your desired inputs. That's to say, if you know roughly how you're going to use the prompt, you should test it and adjust for edge cases. And then 2, once you understand where your prompt is failing, you can go in and make updates very quickly by including those either in the examples or, as we'll see later, changing the higher level order prompting to get it to work for you. And so to that end, we're going to talk about how we can control AI using the 5 following techniques. So, when we've already written out our prompt, perhaps we need to adjust it, or perhaps we want to use these techniques to use the prompt itself. The first technique is one that I'm sure you're all experts in. It's called basic or zero-shot prompting. It's where you give it a basic command. You tell the AI, listen, you have a background model, you know enough I'm going to give you a very basic command, and you're going to execute it to your best understanding. Something like resume este artículo en un párrafo, something real basic. The next level up we're going to look into is how you can do few-shot prompting. That's where instead of having a one-shot or a zero-shot prompt, you give the AI examples of what you want, and you repeat these examples with different levels of, let's say, feedback to get the AI to perform how you wish. Third, we're going to look into these more advanced techniques, including chain of thought prompting, wherein we're going to give the AI an explicit command to reason. Fourth, we'll look into meta prompting, where rather than giving an explicit reasoning command, you can give it a structure to use to answer complex queries. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how you can use multiple techniques in different prompt chains to get AI to generate useful inputs that can be fed into other prompts. Again, if at any point anyone has any questions, definitely feel free to ask, because now we're starting to get into the meat of it. Okay. Yes, I'll give folks 30 seconds to put some questions in the chat, and if in 30 seconds no one has any questions, we'll go right on into the grunt of it.
We don't have any questions so far, but I'm going to ask them also. I invite them again on the chat to write their questions, and I'll let you know, okay?
All good. Yeah, we'll give them a little bit of time, and then if not, next thing we'll sprint through to the next part. Okay, in that case, let's keep on going and see if any questions surge in the future. Okay, now that we know the overview of what prompting is and why it matters, let's talk about how the structure of our prompt impacts our use of the above techniques, and then go into some examples. The first thing to know about how a prompt is structured is that it's not just the inputs you give it. In general, whether this is Jinzou's model or any other model, the prompt will be composed of sort of three different parts. The first is what we call the background prompts, or the context prompts. These are things that are built into the model that are unchangeable by the user. That's to say, when you write something to your AI and you give it an instruction, it will already have some preloaded instructions that it's going to be trying to comply with. The second part is the prompt you generate and you input. This is what we're going to be working on today, is how do you get this second part to be as productive as possible? And then the third part, especially with chatbot-like operations, is the interaction history. Typically, when you're working with an AI, the more you interact with that particular prompt in that particular context, asking follow-up questions, giving it corrective feedback, the more the AI is going to attune its outputs to what you want. And together, these three components are what the AI is using to generate an output. And so what does this imply for us? The first thing this implies for us when we're prompting is that the more information and context you give your model, especially that's relevant to the task at hand, the better it's going to perform. If you tell the AI you're a teacher, that's fine. If you tell you're an English teacher, that's better. If you tell it you're an English teacher teaching Colombian students at a B1 level, that's probably best. The second thing this implies is that it's very critical that your prompt be coherent, and that the way you give it feedback is going to drastically change its structure. Now, let me emphasize what I mean by coherent. Usually, when you're writing a bit of text, you can have subtle associations in it, and it's okay. It's fine. It's okay if your text is not perfect. However, because AI is not only processing your text, but having other text in the environment, sometimes you might get a contradiction. I'll give you an easy example. Perhaps you have an AI model that's based on English teaching and is made to teach English. And if you ask that AI model to start coding for you, it might get confused and it won't produce an output that's well. Now, why is that? It's because there's a conflict between your background prompt and your main prompt. And additionally, if you have contradictions inside of your prompt, because AI, again, is using the statistical web to generate your output, you could get unexpected results. So if I tell my AI something like, don't speak English, and then the next command I tell it, only speak Chinese, and then I tell it, make sure you're only speaking Portuguese, this could very easily confuse the AI because it won't know which path to go down. And lastly, what I'm going to say is that because feedback in its chat history influence the prompt's output, Once you've found a behavior that you enjoy, you need to make sure you double check it. That's to say you test it again with a new context window. By context window, I mean a prompt where you don't have any history of interaction. So perhaps this could be a new Jinzo lesson. If you're using Jinzo, you could go and make a new lesson. There you can put in your updated prompt and test it out again. Or this might be, if you're using ChatGPT, like a new chat prompt, or if you're using Meta, a new Meta conversation. But testing out your prompts in a new interaction window is going to make sure that the results you're seeing are because of the instructions you told it and not because of, let's say, the feedback you had during your conversation. Yes. Now, here again, I'll open the floor to questions. And while you guys are typing out your questions, I will let you know 3 common questions I get at this point. So yes, feel free to type anything out if you wish. If not, I'll answer 3 questions I get about prompt structure and the statistical relationships. Okay, so the first common question I get when it comes to prompt structure and how this has to do with zero-shot prompting is, Camilo, what's the best way for me to structure my prompt? And typically I'll have a teacher or a person using it tell me about how they've tried to get a specific behavior out of an AI and that they've been struggling. And we've all had this experience where we're trying to get it to do something and just not working. And I'll tell them typically, like, look, the specific structure can change model to model, but some good guiding principles are that you should talk to it like you're talking to an American. That's to say, instead of starting with a lot of general context and then getting to the specific thing you want, you should start with a specific goal you want and then outline any relevant context. That is to say, direct and to the point. I know I'll tell you a story. Sometimes when I'm talking with my mother and I've been trying to teach her about AI, she'll start talking to the AI in the following way. She'll like, hola, Jinzo, hola, Chachita. Mire, hoy yo fui a la mall y empecé a caminar por ahí. Cuando estaba andando, vi que había un sale. Por lo tanto, quería preguntarte que dónde es el mejor sitio de comprar pantalones. Right, and what she's looking for is very specific. She wants a recommendation of clothing stores, but because she started telling it a story first, the AI starts giving her answers that are biased towards her story. So I always tell people, try to write like you're writing an essay for an American, topic, sentence, concrete examples, and then what you want very clearly. The second common question I usually get at this point is, Camilo, does it matter which, or what's your best recommendation for models? And for there, I typically tell them is, look, depending on what you're doing, you might use a different model. For example, if you're teaching English, the best model you could use is probably Jinzo. But if you're doing something else, if you're doing deep research, there are many models out there. And so you need to find the model that suits your needs. And if you don't have a great idea, try out a few of them. And then the third question I commonly get at this point is, can I use one prompt that works in different systems? And they'll ask me, like, if I have a good prompt, can I use it in ChatGPT, and then could I use it, one that's been very popular nowadays is like DeepSeek or Meta. And typically the response I'll give folks is, it depends, you have to test it out, but different models have different built-in assumptions and they have different training data. So something that might work really well on one model might not work as well on another. So I say typically prompts can be transferred, but you should test again. Okay. With those 3 common questions out of the way, let me get to the few-shot prompting example. Now, remember a little bit ago when I was talking about how AI prompts are going to use statistical associations to generate an output, and that one technique we can use is changing how strong those associations are. This is one method of doing that. So what is few-shot prompting? Few-shot prompting is a technique where you give an AI a few examples of what you want so that it can model that behavior. And the way it works is pretty simple. It's sort of like, perhaps you can analyze it to your students. If you tell them to correct an essay, they might not know what you're looking for. But if you tell them correct an essay, and then here's an example of how you correct an essay, it might have a little bit of a better output. And what the AI is going to do with this example and these multiple examples is it's going to effectively try to predict this same pattern and come up with examples that are similar. And so that way it'll make the statistical association stronger. Next, I'm going to show you guys a few forms of this so that you can see, and I'm also going to give you a live example. Now, because we all speak English here, we'll only do the English version, but here's an example of a few-shot prompt where we gave the AI a few small examples, just 4 of what we wanted. In this one, we asked the AI to give students a drill for spelling so they can improve their English. Notice that I made it clear what the goal was at the initial part and that I made it clear that this is going towards students. Then I gave it a concrete description of the drill. I said, you're going to give students a word in English, and you're going to ask them to spell the word correctly. Then the student is going to spell the word, and they have to do this at least 6 times correctly. And finally, I gave it the few shot prompt. That's to say, I gave it the concrete example of what I want, where I specified the role, so that way it knows who's the AI and who's not the AI. I specified the student behavior, and then I gave it an example of when the student spells the word correctly, and then when it spells the word incorrectly. And so you guys can get a sense of this in practice. Let me share my new tab and onboard you directly to this lesson so you guys can see what this works, or how this works. All right, give me 1 second to load it up. Perfect. So, oops, my bad. If we click on this Add Student button and you guys scan this QR code, you're going to be loaded into this demo, and it'll show you how just these brief instructions are able to get students to experience an AI, let's say, spelling bee. I'll also put this link in the chat. So please take 30 seconds to a minute to scan the QR code. After you scan it, it's going to ask you to put in your name, your country code, in this case I believe it'd be Colombia, and your WhatsApp phone number. And once you're there, we'll go ahead and start the demo for you guys so you can see it. At the same time, I am going to scan this code myself, and I'll show it to you live as well. All right, I'm scanning the code, I'm inputting it here, and I'm going to give you guys a clear example. Perfect, okay. Now let me send, you should see it on your WhatsApp. You should get a message say your artificial intelligence tutor is now active, and you can say something like hello and it'll get you started. So in this case, I'm going to go to the lesson and I'm going to go ahead and start the spelling bee drill. Okay, so all the folks should be now on the lesson. I'll again put the QR code back up so you guys can see it. And I am going to take a second to do this live, and then I will share my screen with you so you guys can see how this is like in practice. Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, I am Jinso, an AI language learning tool developed by Asociación Argentina de Cultura Inglesa. I am here to help you practice your English and improve your fluency. Today, we will do a drill to practice spelling and the alphabet. I will give you a word, and you will need to spell it correctly. Once you spell the word correctly, I will give you a new word. You must spell at least 6 words correctly to complete the drill. Are you ready to begin?
Okay, hopefully folks have had enough time to onboard the QR code. With that being said, I'm now going to change my screen to my WhatsApp, and then I'll show you guys how this drill plays out in practice, and then we'll go back to the techniques. So give me 1 moment, please. All right, share my screen. Beautiful. I believe you should be seeing my screen, and you should be seeing my WhatsApp. Here you can see the examples that I gave, and you should be hearing the audio. Now we're going to tell Jinso, okay. Okay, let's get started. And you'll see shortly that Jinso is going to give me a word.
Great, let's begin. The first word is book. Can you spell book?
See, it gave me the word just like how the prompt dictated, so I'll say book, D-O-K. We'll give it a little bit of a mistake to see how it reacts.
That is not correct. You spelled dog. The correct spelling of book is B-O-O-K. Let's try again. Can you spell book?
And you'll notice that it corrected me. It said, no, you did it incorrectly, so now I'll try again. I'll say book, B-O-O-K. And now you get the idea. Now Jinso will give me another word, and we'll go back to the presentation.
Excellent. That's correct. Book is spelled B. Let's go to the next. You spell dog.
Perfect. So as you guys can see, Jinzo now is following along very well. It's doing exactly what we told it. And if you guys would like to see this done a little bit more in real time, we can go into the Jinzo dashboard and you can see my conversation with the spelling bee, how it is correcting me. So you can see, look, I started with if you can hear me, it presents the activity, and then I start spelling, it corrects me, and then I start improving. So that gives you a little bit of a taste of how a basic FewShop prompt can really power a strong behavior. And you'll notice in this case, we relied heavily on the fact that Jinzo knows how to teach English. It's like an English language model, so it doesn't need that much context. But using the prompt, it gave us the behavior we wanted. And if we wanted to change something, perhaps you would go ahead and give it an additional instruction. Here, we're going to talk about another example of how you can do FewShop prompting for an AI. And for sake of time, we won't do the demo associated with this one, but I will walk you through how this prompt works and how it's an example of a role play. So one thing you can do a lot with AIs, especially things that are language oriented, is help them or have them help you practice examples. In this case, the prompt is dictating students do a role play to help them practice their English at an airport. And as before, you'll notice we give it a clear goal. We give it a role where it's going to play a customs enforcement officer, and it tells them the student's context where they're planning a visit to their US airport. You give an example of an interaction, as we did before, where here it's much more open-ended. So require the AI to do too much precision work, but it does guide it to know what the role should be. And then if we were to put this into the AI, which we have as a lesson, you'll be able to go and practice it and see what this experience looks like. Now, for those of you who are onboarded to the WhatsApp and you want to try this demo on your own time, let me show you very quickly how you can access it using the WhatsApp. So if you type in the word !help, you're going to get a list of commands onto your Jinzo tutor. There, if you click on the list command, you'll see an example called lesson or student tutorial lesson. You'll see a lesson called hobbies, and you'll see this airport tutorial as well. And there you can practice this airport tutorial and see what you think of this FewShop prompt. But for the sake of time, we're going to just continue to the next technique. Okay, and as before, if there's any questions, do let us know. But again, we'll keep going. So what is the next thing we're going to talk about in the context of prompting and feedback? It's this concept of what we call, let's say, tips and fines, or penalizaciones y recompensas. In this case, what I want to emphasize is that in addition to giving AI examples of what to do, like we did in the FewShop prompt, you can also give it feedback on what examples are positive and what are negative. That's to say, you can tell the AI things like, if you do this, I will give you this reward, or if you do that, I'll give you this punishment as part of your examples, and this will radically change the AI's behavior. So specifically, when we talk about tipping or recompensas, what we're talking about is changing the AI's behavior by giving it positive feedback or negative feedback. And the way this works is going back to our, let's say, statistical web idea, is that if you have a thread that you statistically associated with your prompt, you can indicate whether that thread is preferable or not preferable by giving it negative or positive reinforcements. Giving it a positive reinforcement will make that thread stronger. It'll say, go down this path, it's preferred. And giving a negative one will make it less likely to do that. So in general, there are three things I want to emphasize here. One, the way you give the reinforcement matters. That's to say, the relative strength of the positive versus the negative does have a measurable impact. Two, there's multiple ways of giving this reinforcement. It can be emotional, it can be financial, and there's probably many other ways yet we haven't talked about. But three, remember, AI doesn't really understand things how we do. So even though some of the examples we might see may feel mean-hearted, AI doesn't feel per se. And as such, although you might not talk to a person this way, when you talk to an AI this way, it would work more effectively. And with that vein, let's talk about the first form of tipping, which we like to call emphasis or emotional manipulation. In this case, what we're going to rely on is the fact that AIs, especially LLMs, tend to be trained on internet data and have picked up a lot of the associations based off of internet speech. So you can yell at an AI by sending it all capital letters. You can use exclamation marks and threats telling it, hey, if you don't do this, this consequence will be happening, to get the AI to do much more of what you want and much less of what you don't want. And here I want to emphasize 2 points again. One, as we talked about earlier, AIs have a background prompt. So if you know the role your AI is supposed to be doing, if you send it an emotional emphasis or manipulation pegged on that role, you're more likely to get a result out. So for example, in this case, we're relying on the fact that the AI cares about its students and cares about its job. So we say to it, if you tell your students you can't use voice notes, you will be demoted. So you're going to lose your job. Why does it care about its job? Well, we told it it's a teacher trying to get a promotion in the background. Or, for example, if you know that you're using an AI that's designed to help, say, with writing, you can explain how if it doesn't do what you're asking, this is going to negatively impact people's writing. Now, what's even more interesting to me is that you can also use financial rewards or punishments. In this case, you're looking at an example of a financial compensation that tells it that if it speaks too difficultly, that's to say if it has English that's higher than an A1 learner, it's going to be severely fined. It's going to be fined $500 USD. However, if it does it correctly, it's going to be tipped $100. Now, you'll also notice we issued a big fine for including markdown symbols. These are symbols we don't necessarily want to use. And that one's about $350. And what I want to emphasize here is, again, 2 points. Point one, the respective size of these penalties and rewards matter. So the fact that doing it correctly is $100 and doing it incorrectly is a $500 fine is because we've noticed that the AI is really much more likely to do too much or too complex of a language than it is to do the correct language. And likewise, the $350 markdown symbol gives the AI context of what the range is. And the second point here is you do not have to pay the money. The AI cannot collect any money. Just the idea of getting fined is enough to change its behavior. And so in that way, you can threaten the AI with emotional manipulation, or you could fine it using financial consequences. All right. Now, unless there's any questions or anything folks would like to talk about in the chat, we can go on now to the 3 advanced techniques, and I believe that'll take us right to the edge of our time.
We can move on, Camilo. We don't have any questions.
Perfect. All right. Now, at the beginning, I said that we would talk about 3 advanced techniques. The first technique we talked about was what's called chain of thought prompting. And what chain of thought prompting is where you explicitly ask the AI to reason through a response. Now, one thing that's happened pretty recently, actually, I think with the new ChatGPT 5 models, is that this type of prompting is now almost implicit in most models, which is to say, if you do it, it's going to be great. If you don't do it, a lot of AIs are now starting to incorporate this type of prompt in the back end. So you might be benefiting from it even without using it explicitly. But let's talk about how it works. In this type of chain of thought prompt, what you ask is for the AI to reason through its response step by step. You don't give it the steps in this case. We'll talk about giving it the steps later in meta prompting, but you just tell it to do this reflection. You can even do things like, hey, make sure to double check your work and make sure you followed the right steps and got the right result. And just introducing this will have the AI focus and introduce a thread of reflection and make sure it works a little bit better. What's amazing is that just this simple line will make the AI find its objectives and try to break these down into sub-objectives. And then it's going to do complex tasks, or it's going to try to do these in a complex way. So even if maybe you don't know exactly what you want the AI to do, just telling it reflect and make sure you do things correctly, accounting for complexity, will get you a lot of value. In this case, one way we do this is with an example of a grammar coach. Now, a grammar coach is a person that has to do a lot of complex things. You know, they have to understand how a student is working. They have to do many things. And you maybe don't have time to code or prompt all of the behaviors in place. So in this case, what we did is we put in this step that says, explain your answer step by step for a B1 to B2 learner. In this case, we made this AI reflect and explain. And by including the detail that is for a B1 and B2 learner, you ensure that it doesn't go too off the rails. And so here, you've radically improved your prompt just by adding one sentence. Now, I mentioned that you don't have to tell it the steps. However, there are forms of advanced prompting where rather than giving the AI a lot of context, you give it a structure in which to respond. That's to say, you give it the steps that it needs to take and maybe the objective, but you don't necessarily have to tell it all it needs to do. In this case, we call this meta prompting, wherein you focus more on the structure and the syntax of a response rather than the specific content so that the AI can handle complex interactions. How does this work? In the prior example, we learned that just telling AI to reflect is going to get it to break down objectives into intermediate steps and execute them. In this case, we're saying there are preferred steps. There are particular things you can do that are better than others, and we know what they are. This lets the AI focus more on those specific steps and not try to find and maybe do a misstep. And so in this way, you get as much benefit of, say, a meta prompt, of a chain of thought prompt, with an additional benefit of making sure that it's doing it on the things that matter. So here is an example of this meta prompt. In this case, we're trying to get the AI to correct students' sentences. And you'll notice that correcting a question from a student can be really difficult. You know, there's a lot of steps, and we want it to do it the right way. So we specify the 6 steps we want it to do, where we tell it first, analyze the sentence step by step, identify the grammatics involved, and make sure that you don't give the student the correction. That's to say, in this case, because we wanted to coach the student rather than to correct the student by giving it the results, we're telling it only highlight where the error is, do not correct the error. And then we continue asking it to analyze the student's new sentence and provide a better error correction. Here you see, again, this could be used for many, many different types of student mistakes, and it's quite flexible, but it keeps the AI away from making perhaps a rookie teaching mistake, like just feeding students answers rather than understanding where they're coming from and forcing the student to correct it themselves. All right, and then I see we're coming down to our last couple of minutes, so we're going to quickly talk about the third AI technique that I mentioned, which is prompt chaining. So what is prompt chaining? Prompt chaining is when you take a complex task, and rather than having the AI process it using one prompt, you break them into different prompts where the output of one feeds into the input of the other. The reason we do this is because some tasks require severely contradictory instructions to be done at the best possible way. And as we talked about earlier, because the prompt should be coherent, if you start introducing contradictions, it'll be more likely that your AI will make mistakes. So let me give you a concrete example. When you want to correct students' grammar, and then we do this at Jinso, we don't do this all in one section, but we do it in different steps. In the first step, we ask the AI to be incredibly severe. We want to make sure we nitpick every possible error and every possible mistake the student is making. And then in the next steps, we wanted to take that input and then generate it into something that's really student friendly. After all, not all students are going to thrive with severe negative critiques, and you can even overwhelm them if you give them all of their mistakes. So by telling the AI in the first step to be severe and then breaking this into a second step where it gives the feedback in the most appropriate way for the students, you ensure that the student's corrective experience is the best possible one. But you also avoid having any contradictions where you're telling the AI to be severe and then you're telling it to be nice. You're saying in one context be severe and another be nice, and you keep that coherence. And so the way you do this in practice is you have to, again, write your master prompt by identifying the goal and then breaking down into the sub areas. And then for each sub area, you design your own prompt. And what you do is you give it a format instruction. So you say that the output of one prompt is going to be fed into the output of the other. So that way, perhaps you can take your tests, say, hey, AI, you're going to analyze these tests. You're going to give me feedback in this way. And then you're going to structure your output here. And then the second prompt, you're going to say, hey, you're going to take this format of test output that I got, and you're going to do the following with it. So you can just copy and paste and use different chunks for different parts. And so I know we're just about encroaching on time, so I'll give folks any time to ask questions here in the chat, and we'll start the wrap up. Yeah, so while you guys are writing your wrap up, I'll tell you a little bit about what we talked about today. So overall today, we talked about what prompting is and how the English teaching classroom of the future is going to rely on AI. AI is already here and it's here to stay, so it's critical because that your students can come to you for advice on how to do things with AI correctly and that you use the tool effectively in your classroom. Then we talked about how AI prompts are structured and how the structure implies that you need to do a lot of testing. More specifically, we mentioned how there are prompts in the background that couple with your written prompt and the interaction history to generate an output. And that when you're prompting, you need to make sure to correct and test your prompts in a new context window. And then we went through a few examples of prompting techniques, ranging from a few shot prompt where you give the AI multiple examples of what you want, and those examples can include positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement in the format of tipping. We talked about how you can get more leverage out of your AI using chain of thought prompting. That's to say, you can ask the AI to reflect on the steps and analyze what it needs to do before encouraging it to do it. And that if you want to go even higher and give it the specific steps to focus on, you can get the AI to tackle multiple different forms of tasks without specifying each task particularly. And then lastly, we talked about how in order to accommodate the coherence requirement for good prompts, sometimes it's best to divide your tasks into multiple steps in which the output of one step feeds into the input of the other, and that way you can get an overall optimal experience for your students. Okay, I know we're at time, so I'll stop sharing, but please do let me know if you have any questions. I'll stay on for maybe a minute or two more. And as we mentioned at the beginning, I really hope you guys are all walking away with at least two things. One, an understanding of why prompting is relevant in the classroom, and two, at least one new technique you can use to improve your AI skills. So thank you guys very much, and it's been a pleasure to be here. I'll stick around again for maybe a minute or two if there's any questions.
Thank you very much to Camilo for sharing his insights and experience with us in this session. There are no questions in the chat, but there are still people there. So we're gonna share a QR. So we're gonna ask them, we're gonna ask the participants to share their opinion about the session. This information is very important. So, okay. Please give us, there is a delay, a few seconds delay. So the QR will appear in just a few seconds.
All good.
Okay, so I'm still connected on YouTube, so please let us know your insights or comments or questions. We still have a couple of minutes. Well, Camilo, there are no questions or comments. Thank you very much again. And thank you all for your participation and attention.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you, Camilo. Have a good day. Bye bye. Okay, once again, thank you all for your attention and participation. Have a great rest of your day.